So thanks everybody for joining this live Q&A on quality regulatory and clinical careers in MedTech. We thought to put this session together just to give you all an opportunity to maybe ask some questions and to get your answers. It is that time of year where people are thinking about their careers, and we wanted to offer the opportunity to actually provide our insights and expert answers, trends, what we're seeing in the industry, to be able to help you all when it comes to having a better understanding of how to best navigate your careers. So thank you all for taking the time to join. And if you're watching this on demand, thank you for watching this on demand. I'm Elena Kyria. I'm the CEO and founder of Elemed. And for those of you who don't know her, I'm joined by the lovely Karen Moons.
Hi, everyone.
So Karen's going to be just starting with a short update and intro to explain a little bit the housekeeping and how we're going to run this session. And then I think we're going to jump right in. We've got tons of questions that I want to get to. And we're also going to be providing you the chance to ask your questions live in the session as well. So Karen, maybe you could just jump right in and explain a little bit about how we're going to run the session.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks from my side as well for everyone to join this event. This will be obviously 1 hour long. It will be a live Q&A, and you can ask everything you ever wanted to know about careers in regulatory, quality, or clinical within the MedTech industry. And yeah, Elena will try to go through as much of them as we can in the 1 hour. Some of you have already pre-registered the question. That was what Elena was talking about before. We received a ton of questions already, but if you haven't pre-registered your question and would like to ask something, you can pop it in the chat, and we have made the settings so that the messages do only come into me. So it will be confidential, in case you would like that. However, it would also be great, if we could get some of you, to ask your questions to Elena live yourself, to have a little bit of interaction in this session, so that Elena doesn't have to do a monologue for the whole time. So yeah, if you would like to ask a question, and if you would be happy to have us go live to you, please pop it in the chat message to me as well, so I know, you would be happy to ask it live. Another thing that would be great is if you have the toolbar on Zoom on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you actually have the option to interact. So you can do a thumbs up, you can do a heart emoji, you can crack up laughing, and it would be great if you use those so Elena can see how we're doing with everyone if you're still there. And I think that's everything from the housekeeping perspective. You can have your videos on or not, however you prefer. And one last thing that I want to mention before we actually get started, we do have a Christmas competition running on LinkedIn where you can win a free book, and it's the Regulatory Writing 2nd edition from RAPS. So I will pop the link to the competition in the chat for you all, and basically all you have to do is to win is pop something Christmassy in the comments. So it can be a picture of your Christmas tree. We had some cookies on there, some Christmas decoration. I don't think we had a Christmas cup or something like that yet, but it should just be something that makes you feel festive, right? So feel free to comment on the competition, and I'm just going to send that across to you all right now. And then I would say, let's start with the first question, Elena.
Okay, so Karen, can you maybe, read the questions as we go, and then I'll just jump in and answer them?
Yes, definitely.
So now,
all right.
Here we go.
Okay, Elena. So someone had the question, which regulatory jobs are in demand as we get closer to the MDR, IVDR date of application?
Okay, fine. So look, there's two things to think about when we're talking about date of application for MDR and IVDR. There's short term and then there's long term. So from a short term perspective, the MDR and IVDR are generating positions that are more what we call contract roles. So they're normally short term freelance consultant type projects. And here, what companies typically are looking for are people that are able to really do the hands-on work. So hands-on remediation, documentation, in order to prepare the tech files, so that they're compliant for the new MDR. So there we're looking for people that are really more able to be hands-on. But then the question is, after the date of application actually comes, what does the MDR and IVDR mean on the longer term for professionals working in quality regulatory and clinical? And there we see different types of positions that are either opening up or positions where we're seeing an increased demand of headcount. And these are predominantly permanent based roles. And so there in particular, what we're looking at are people working in post-market surveillance, vigilance. So this whole piece, due to the increase demand from manufacturers, we're seeing companies actually creating dedicated roles to PMS and vigilance. And this either is sitting more in quality, or some companies have it sitting in their regulatory department, but that's an area of growth. Another area that we're seeing are medical writing, so people that are writing clinical evaluation reports. This is an increased growth. Clinical study managers as well, another area of growth that we're seeing on the longer term. From a regulatory perspective, we're not seeing massive increased growth of headcount, but regulatory is very much, quite a solid profession to be in. So we're just seeing consistent, we're not seeing whole departments being built brand new as we are maybe in medical writing, but we are seeing a consistent stream of demand for regulatory professionals that in particular have experience with Europe. So yeah, that's the answer to that one, Karen.
All right, that was quite a good answer, Elena. Off to the next question. So, which is the best approach to land a MedTech job having a scientific background in nanotechnology and advanced materials?
Okay, so that's a really specific question for somebody very specific out there. The thing that I always say to people that come in, if it's kind of like your first job in MedTech, I would always say try to go specific on your area of product expertise, but broad in terms of what type of role that you would apply for. So if you have a specific background in nanotech, or even if, you've got a specific, background in, let's say, biomedical engineering, but you've got a specialization in orthopedic devices, let's say, and you're looking for your first role in MedTech, always go for the companies that specialize in those type of products and apply to a broad variety of positions within those companies. So don't only look for, let's say, regulatory roles, but maybe look at stuff in regulatory, in clinical, in quality, maybe even in development, maybe even in product management, all within the area of expertise that you've specialized in, because these companies are going to value much more, obviously, the expertise that you've studied. And there might be positions there that would lend themselves very nicely to what but maybe that you haven't necessarily thought about. So that's always my advice for when you're looking for your first position in MedTech.
Perfect, great. Just a reminder, I am receiving some messages in the chat. If you would like to ask it live yourself or anonymously, please make sure to pop it in as well. So, I know if we can jump live to you, or if you want to stay anonymous, which is absolutely fine as well. Elena, which courses would you recommend to stay updated on the future developments of these areas, especially in quality and regulatory?
Mm-hmm. So So this is a question that we're always asked, professional qualifications versus experience. And I think the thing that I can't stress enough is that companies will always hire for experience over professional qualifications if the professional qualifications are not mandatory in order to do a certain role. So in terms of kind of staying updated, one thing that is, if we're talking about the new regulations, for example, the MDR group that we have on LinkedIn, that I hope some of you are members of, we've got nearly 5,000 people or so in there. That's great, because that's where people are really sharing breaking news and people are really asking questions, and people kind of helping each other and giving their own interpretations of certain parts of the new regs. So I would definitely recommend, if you're not a member of that group, to join the group. In terms of courses, to kind of continue to develop your experience, I definitely always recommend looking at the notified bodies and what sort of training that they're offering, because they're usually the most highly recognized. BSI and TUV have very good training courses on different specific areas of regulatory and quality and clinical topics. RAPS as an organization is very well known, especially in regulatory affairs, and their content is highly recognized as well. But as I say, keeping up to date is more about, you know, being fully immersed, whereas doing courses is kind of like supplementing your knowledge. I also highly recommend going to, you know, events, even virtual events that they're offering now, in order to really see that that's really where you're going to keep up to date in terms of what's breaking and what's not. So I hope that helps.
Perfect. Thanks, Elena. All right, we have some more. There was a person that says, as far as I know, behind every successful CV is a supporting cover letter as well as nice looking LinkedIn profile. So if a cover letter and LinkedIn profile are essential tools when assessing job candidates by hiring managers at the first HR filter stage, rather than applicants' expertise, soft skills, and so on, how to make them more attractive and job winning from personal marketing perspective. So do you have any useful tips for candidates with technical background on how to pass the first impression challenge step? Yeah, and that would be greatly appreciated by that person.
Okay, so just to summarize, Karen, to make sure I understood the question, is this one basically around like how to improve the cover letter because it's the most paid attention to?
Yeah, I think that person was asking about cover letter, and maybe if you can say something about LinkedIn, you know, what's important for a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, sure. So so this is a really interesting question, and I think culturally, you know, some countries tend to use cover letters more than others. But a few months back, I surveyed 151 hiring managers, and I specifically asked the question around, you know, where do you look first? So when you receive a candidate's application, are you looking at their CV? Are you looking at their LinkedIn? Or are you actually reading the cover letter? And what I can tell you from 151 hiring managers, 72% said that they skip opening the cover letter. And actually they open the CV first. 17% go straight to LinkedIn before they open the cover letter or the CV. And only 11% go straight to the cover letter. And this was absolutely critical because it just shows, and I can say as a recruiter as well, I will always open the CV before I open the cover letter. So I actually would stress the most important is that your CV is clearly reflecting your experience and suitability for the job. So really what you should be doing is tailoring your CV per role you're applying to. So if there's a specific type of experience that a position is looking for, it needs to be clearly seen in your CV. To have a general CV and then mention that specific experience in your cover letter is not enough, because as we can see, people are not necessarily opening your cover letters, and those that are, when it comes to making a cover letter have high impact, it absolutely needs to be customized. So, you know, sometimes we see cover letters from candidates that basically just talk about the CV in like a story format. So I started here, then I went here, then this is what I did, then this is what I did. But actually, the cover letters that are the most effective, if you're going to use a cover letter, are the ones that say, you know, dear hiring manager at company X, you know, I was interested in this role because I have this experience that you require over this and this period of time. These are the projects that I've worked on that are specific to what I know you're looking for. And this is where I feel like I personally would be able to add value to your position, and really making sure that it's customized. So, for those of you that are interested, we have, Karen, I think we've got some templates. I think we've got a cover letter template or a cheat sheet, and we've also got something on CVs as well. So I'll be sure that we include this when we send the follow-up, so you all have access to it. When it comes to LinkedIn, you know, a couple of high-level tips is just to make sure that it's up to date, and, you know, whatever you have on your CV is reflected in LinkedIn, and it doesn't need to be to the same level of detail, but what I'm talking about are positions, right? So we've had situations, unfortunately once, where we had a candidate who basically the CV had extra, the CV had less positions than what LinkedIn had. And the job titles on LinkedIn were not corresponding with the CV, so that they looked more inflated on LinkedIn. And it was actually something that the hiring manager picked up on when they cross-referenced, and it was actually a reason why they didn't proceed with the candidate. So this is really important to ensure consistency across your messaging. Even if you don't have your LinkedIn totally up to date, at least ensure that the messaging and the career history is consistent.
Perfect. We just received a message regarding CVs. So as we just covered it, Elena, do you think it's better to highlight competencies or a successful specific experience?
In a CV?
Yeah, in a CV.
So I would say it's best to kind of do both. So what I really like to see when I'm looking at someone's CV is clear competencies, but not soft skills. So the thing that I always say to the candidates that I'm coaching are soft skills are subjective. So what for you might be somebody who's really proactive, for somebody else that might be somebody who's really pushy, right? And it's all a matter of perspective. So when it comes to your CV, always try to keep it factual and based on things that can be proven. So I always like to see key competencies in terms of like key experience. So if we're talking regulatory, do you have experience of CE marking? Have you done 510Ks? What risk type products have you worked on? What geographies have you covered? Have you worked on new product development? Have you worked on post-market activities? So these type of things I like to see, but then also in your actual career. So what I always say to people is your job title and your responsibilities is essentially what you're supposed to do on a daily basis, but your accomplishments are how well you do your job, how effective you are at your job. So it's great if you have a few bullet points about what your duties are or your responsibilities are, but don't forget to actually put in there accomplishments, because that's actually telling us how well you do your job, not only what your responsibilities are, but actually if you're any good at what you do. So it's a combination of both, Karen, in response to that answer.
Perfect, thank you. All right, next question. So when working in RA, what interfacing knowledge from QA and clinical should one acquire? So what is the best way to broaden your knowledge? If you're purely working in RA, what can you do to like get some info about what's going on in quality and clinical?
So if you're actually having the chance to collaborate with, which I would hope that you are in your company, if you're able to collaborate on a project, for example, with clinical and with quality, actually kind of like have a conversation with your peers and understand, what is it you love about your job, and what is it that maybe you always wanted to know about regulatory, and I'll be happy to share that with you or to teach you. And I always wanted to know this about quality, or I always wanted to know this about clinical, and actually have more of a conversation to kind of learn a little bit more about what their role is. Also, it's great to have the chance to kind of like volunteer. So volunteer to help them with something that they're working on, so that you can start to just get a little bit of the experience. Then you can supplement it with a training and then look to maybe transition into a role like that. But especially if you're working in teams that are like collaborative, it's great to just have a conversation with your peers. And I'm sure that there's something that they would want to know about what you do, and maybe have like an exchange of knowledge and information and see how that goes.
Perfect. Great. All right. Now we had a person with a lot of questions. So when is the right time to start a career in quality or regulatory?
As soon as you know that it's a career that you would want to pursue. I think the great thing now is like it could be your first job, but equally, some of the best quality and regulatory people that I know come from other areas outside of Q&R, because it sometimes gives you a different perspective if you've got an experience in product development, for example, and then you move to regulatory. So I think as soon as you've decided or you're interested in pursuing it, it's never too early or too late.
Perfect. Okay. And what skills do you need to improve to get the right start?
Okay, so if we break it down into kind of like soft skills and hard skills, then so soft skills in terms of these type of functions, and this is not just something that I'm saying. I ask VPs all the time, directors all the time. We recruit these roles all the time. The one that comes up over and over again is this concept of problem solving. And for those of you maybe that joined, I did a really interesting kind of live discussion with Gunther Weishar from TCAN. So he's the Senior VP of Quality Regulatory. And he spoke about what it is to be a problem-solving quality regulatory professional and how to actually become one. So I definitely recommend checking out that conversation if you haven't already. But that's definitely something. So are you somebody that sees something as always blocking, or are you able to kind of come up with different options for maybe handling problems? Attention to detail is a big one. And I'm sure everybody here has great attention to detail if you're working in regulatory. I think understanding the big picture is also something that's becoming more and more interesting for companies, especially if you're looking at working in a small or a medium-sized business. Having a good understanding of how your role actually fits into the bigger picture and a curiosity to want to learn is really important. From a technical perspective, obviously having some sort of technical background or background in that specific product that you're working on, or a background in the MedTech industry is important to obviously understand, what you're operating in. Failing that, some sort of education in quality and regulatory, or some sort of hands-on experience, even if it's an internship or, having supported a specific type of project, is also really highly valued.
Perfect. And there was another question which doesn't quite align with the one before, but goes into a similar direction. So when do you think it is the right time to make a career move?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. I think I've got a video coming out actually on this topic soon. So the thing that I always say to people is make the move when you stop learning, right? When you stop feeling challenged. And don't worry, this is controversial, but I truly believe, don't stay in a role that you're unhappy in or where you've kind of stagnated just to collect time on your CV. Because, the question is, do you have 5 years of experience in company X? Or are you repeating year 1 5 times over and over again? Because if you're repeating year 1 5 times, you're not actually learning and developing and growing. And so for another company, it might not be as valuable. So I would always say, if you get to the point where you feel like you're stagnating or you've stopped learning, the first thing you need to do before you start looking for other opportunities is address it internally. So I'm a big believer of always going internal and saying, what else can I be doing? I'd like to transition, or I'd like to pick up more projects. How else can I be doing that? What's the next step for me inside of this company? And address it internally. And then you know where you stand. If it's basically, the response is, no, this is your role and there's no other option for you to progress, you have to just keep doing what you're doing, then, it's a good option to maybe start to consider external options. But always try to address that internally, because, companies, if they value you, they will try to do their best to keep you by offering you other opportunities, other projects, side steps, other transitions, and that type of thing.
Perfect. And we had a question that I find really interesting. So Elena, what new position titles will there be now, obviously due to COVID and or the new regulations that take place soon?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely there are new position titles, although in this area, regulatory and quality, even in clinical as well, we don't really see consistency in job titles. But a couple of the hot titles that are coming out are the PRRC is one, obviously because of Brexit and other countries leaving the EU. For example, in the UK, there's this UK responsible person. There's also these authorised rep roles. But I think kind of more it's about understanding it's not just about titles, it's about new responsibilities that are starting to come out. And so these areas around post-market, these areas around clinical, medical writing, even if the titles are more classic, the actual responsibilities that will come underneath them will be new, especially in regulatory. For example, if you're looking at areas like software as a medical device, again, it will be a regulatory role, but these are kind of hot areas. Combination devices also, and obviously IVDs are hot areas where we're seeing role growth.
Perfect. All right. We've received a question on chat, and the person is basically asking, what do you, Elena, think about these this job application software tools, for example, Workday, that are used by a lot of people, especially big companies out there?
Okay, I hope it's not a HR person that's asked this question. So these online tools and platforms, I think from a business perspective, I can totally understand why companies implement them, right? It creates a streamlined workflow. It allows companies to really see kind of their candidates, where they're coming from, all that kind of stuff. But the amount of friction that it creates from a candidate perspective is huge, right? So the dropout rate of candidates applying for a role, I don't know the stat, but I know for a fact it's huge, because essentially you spend all this time doing your CV and then you have to just recreate your CV in this form. Then you have to upload loads of information, so that it's a tedious process. Then you hit submit and you just get like, it goes into a black hole. And I can't tell you the amount of companies that we've worked with that have these automated software systems and they still don't find the candidates, quite simply because it's either being done by a keyword search. Sometimes you can beat the algorithm, but actually it doesn't create a good candidate experience. So, like a customer experience, when you purchase something from a shop, everyone's talking about creating a good customer experience. And I'm all about companies trying to create good candidate experiences. So that means no friction, that means personalized feedback, that means actually getting back to people. And these automated systems don't allow for it as well. So unfortunately, when you are working with big companies, you can't really get around it. But the best thing is to, if you are being represented by a recruiter, to understand, do you have a relationship with this company? Because if you do, there's usually a fast track route to making sure that your CV doesn't just get lost in a black hole.
Perfect. And what are the ways to specialize along a career in the quality assurance field? Is it mainly possible through education or professional experience?
To specialize?
Yeah.
So it's always, again, the education versus experience. So it's always experience first, supplemented by education. So how can you, if we apply it specifically to quality, so maybe it's, becoming really specialized in a certain type of quality. So product quality or quality management systems, or even within that, I know people that have had hugely successful careers quite simply focusing on auditing or training, so either you can really choose a part of quality and specialize in that, really hone in on that. You can specialize, for example, in quality, but for a certain size of company. So, I see great opportunity for somebody who maybe is more generalist in terms of the type of quality that they do, but they specialize in startup companies or companies less than 50 people, because their needs from a quality perspective are different to the needs of a great big multinational. And so I really believe in building up like a portfolio of experience throughout your career, whether you're perm or whether you're a consultant. Always think about, adding to this portfolio of experience, because that is always what companies are looking at first. Then they're looking at qualifications. Again, the qualifications, if it's absolutely mandatory to do your job, they will obviously look at the qualification first to say, okay, does that person have it or not? But then they're looking at what experience do you have specific to what we're looking for, and how can you best help us?
Perfect. Okay. Now we're having a very, very interesting question. So someone is asking about the pros and cons of working as a regulatory affairs professional in a big international company. So 500 plus people, might even be 5,000 that the person meant there, and a small local company of only 50 people plus. So what would you say is more beneficial for the long-term career development, a big company, which is international, or a small one?
So first of all, I think you have to understand what you're shooting for on the long term. And I did a session, Karen, it would be great if you also include this in the follow-up. I did a kind of discussion on different career routes for professionals. It was focused on regulatory, but the same concepts would apply for quality or for clinical, which is this idea of long-term, where do you want to go? Do you want to go into like the corporate leadership route? Do you want to become like a senior expert, really knowing your subject matter expertise? Or do you want to go self-employed on the long term? Once you've chosen out of these three options, then this question can be better applied, because there's pros and cons to both. If you're going for the leadership route, obviously working in a great big company allows you more opportunities to potentially move upwards, because it's a bigger company, so naturally there are more opportunities. But if you're going for the kind of for the self-employed route, they tend to like people to have quite broad regulatory and quality experience. When you're working in a big company, if you're working in regulatory, you might be focused on one specific country or one specific aspect of regulatory affairs, so it might not lend itself so well. On the other hand, if you're looking to really be like a senior expert in regulatory affairs but be self-employed, not self-employed, but working for multiple different companies, as you transition through your career, then working in a big company where you can really go deep adds value. So I think first start by understanding where you want to go long term, and then reapply this question.
Perfect. And we had another question from someone who is currently working in a startup, and the person is asking the question: what can they do to make the move into a big corporate company in the same position? What can they do to become a QA RA manager from a startup into a big company?
So I would always say, first of all, is this the route that you want to go? So again, asking that question of long term, moving from a startup to a corporate, will that help me get to where I want to go? And if the answer is yes, then you've got to understand, okay, what role am I applying for here? And what experience do I specifically have that will be valuable for a large corporate company? Definitely, just to give you some high level, if you're working in a startup, typically what you have is the ability to flex really quickly, because things are really dynamic in startups all of the time. So normally you're able to pivot really, really well. Also, you tend to have a broader experience, but maybe on less products. So maybe you've jumped into a bit of quality and a bit of regulatory, but maybe on one specific product type. So, how can you apply that in this specific role at the corporate company? So you need to look at specifically the requirements, and then match up what have you done in your experience that is relevant to those requirements, and make sure it's clear on your CV.
Perfect. All right. So Elena, obviously, you already did a thing on the future RA expert. So someone is asking, what are the main soft skills and technical skills in the area of digitalization? Obviously, it becomes important, that are needed to be a fit for the future as a QA RA expert.
Yeah, so just coming back to this idea of problem solving. So I think problem solving, collaboration from a soft perspective, also being comfortable in grey areas, and being comfortable in areas where maybe you don't have experience and having to find out the answer to certain questions. Technology changes faster than regulation. So inevitably, especially if you're working kind of in the software as a medical device area, or anything that's kind of, quite high tech and fluid, you're very often going to find yourself in situations where maybe there isn't a precedent, or maybe you don't know the answer. So you have to be comfortable in being able to find answers to problems that maybe you haven't worked on before. From a technical perspective, I see companies making more of a move towards specialist type of experience if you're going to be employed by a company. So really, do you have experience with class 3 devices? Do you have experience specifically working with new product development projects? But then also the other thing to consider is, a lot of like the admin side of regulatory, I do see that being automated in the future. So a lot of the stuff that's like form filling, where it doesn't require those problem solving skills per se, where it's just more kind of like administrative. I do see these type of roles there. I do see technology being brought in that will automate that workflow. So I would really start focusing your experience on, those kind of like projects, new product development projects, if you can, and innovative technology to really start to build up that portfolio of experience in new areas.
Perfect. And what would you say are the currently most requested tasks and skills in the medical device industry?
Whoa, in the medical device industry is big, Karen. Let's apply it to the role types that we're talking about here. So I would definitely say from a quality perspective, auditing is a big area. People that have specific experience around 13485 is obviously big. From a regulatory perspective, we're very interested, and companies very interested in people that have experience with new product development projects, people that have experience with MDR, IVDR implementation, experience with CE marking, 510K is very interesting. And then also specific regions and countries. So for example, Asia with a specific focus on China or Japan. If I look at some of the roles that we've had over the last 6 months, some of the companies that we're working with are specifically looking for candidates that have experience in these countries as countries of specific market growth for them. So and then from a clinical perspective, obviously, medical writing, clinical evaluation reports, clinical study managers running kind of the clinical ops side of things. And from a quality management system perspective, I would definitely say building up QMSs from scratch, especially if you're a consultant or a freelancer. This is what a lot of startups look for.
Perfect. Another person has pre-registered their question and said, to me, this year has been tough. I found it hard to find a manager job in QA/RA in medical devices. What kind of competencies are required now? Is it leadership or deep knowledge about requirements?
So the question is, what do you mean by manager, I would guess, right? Because manager in regulatory and quality as well, actually, is one of these titles that doesn't really mean much, because it could be a project manager, it could be a senior specialist, but you're called a manager, or it could truly be a team leader. So if we take it in the concept of team management, then companies will always look for leadership experience. And the one thing that I really want to stress is there are some myths that are kind of out there in the industry. So one of them is like, we're all fishing in the same pool, which kind of is true, but isn't totally true, because notified bodies don't really fish for regulatory people. They fish more for R&D people. But there is this sense that when you're kind of at specialist level, there's a lot of recruiters contacting you. There seem to be a lot of jobs out there. There's so much out there. And you kind of feel like, yeah, I think when we last looked at the stat, we were looking at, for every one person, there were 6 roles at specialist level. But when you go to manager level, the competition significantly increases, because a high percentage of specialists want to become managers. And so it almost kind of flips itself around. So then I have people say, okay, well, I'm really surprised. There seems to be loads of jobs out there, but there's not that many leadership roles, which is totally true. And the higher up you go into the pyramid, the less roles there are and the higher the competition there is. And what this means is that companies really have the luxury of being able to choose amongst people for leadership roles, really looking specifically for leadership experience. And so if you're applying for leadership roles, but you don't have any sort of leadership experience, unless the company is willing to flex on it, which most of them won't at the beginning of their search, because they always look for the golden unicorn candidate that can fly, basically it's going to become quite difficult. So then the question is, how do you get leadership experience? And so you have to look at, is there an opportunity internally? So I always say to people, if you're looking for your first management role, always try to get that internally if you can, and then transition outwards, because companies are less likely to take a risk, because when they hire you, it's essentially a risk of hiring somebody that they don't know and it might not work out, plus hiring somebody that has no leadership experience and needs total training in that, doesn't know anybody from the team. So if a company has a choice between hiring somebody internally and training them on leadership, or hiring somebody externally with no leadership experience, unless there's absolutely no opportunity for them to do that internally, they will usually go internally rather than externally. And so you will always have an advantage over external candidates if you can put yourself forward for leadership roles internally. So that's my recommendation.
Perfect. We already touched a lot on like the most in demand skill sets for quality, regulatory, and clinical positions. Would you be able to break that down a bit more? Because there is a question asking about, the most in demand skill sets for QA, RA, clinical, but for the different professional profiles, so consultants, managers, directors. Can you go a bit more into that?
Yeah. So from a consultant perspective, the most in demand skill set would be this hands-on ability. So when companies go to consultants, they really want people that can actually do the work as opposed to do the really strategic stuff. And sometimes we see a little bit of a mismatch between people saying, okay, now I'm going to become a consultant, but all I want to do is strategy for a company and I don't actually want to do any of the execution. And so not saying that those type of roles don't exist, but when companies go for strategic consulting in quality and regulatory, they'll normally go for people that they know where they already have relationships. And so it can become quite difficult to only target those roles. So I would say that if you're looking kind of from a consultant perspective, you know, do consider a wide range of positions, ones that allow you to be hands-on, where you can maybe get into a client and then build up to doing more strategic work for them, for example. If you are already quite senior and you don't want to do the really, really hands-on work, you can maybe look at interim positions as well. So, for example, when we're recruiting a VP on perm, there might be a moment where that company has a gap of 3 months and they need an executive person to kind of come in and just kind of run that position. So I'd maybe suggest looking at that. In terms of quality, you know, we already spoke about that. From a leadership perspective, what companies tend to look at are, did you build your team versus did you inherit your team? So actual experience of actually building up a team is valued more than inheriting a team and never recruiting or developing anyone within it. And at really executive leadership level, what companies look at are remote leadership. So are you managing locally, but are you also able to manage across multiple geographies? Are you able to manage across multiple different leadership levels? So managing managers is also something that I look at quite a lot for the VP roles that I recruit for. And also multi-site responsibility. So are you leading multiple sites all over the world and then the regions? These are kind of the key things that companies look for.
Perfect. Coming back to your favorite topic, LinkedIn profiles. Elena, what would you say? Can a LinkedIn profile be more detailed than a CV?
Can a LinkedIn profile be more detailed than a CV? I would say no. So I would say essentially your LinkedIn profile could be like your online CV, but a little bit more generalist, right? So a little bit more like this is the roles, this is what I did, these are the high level responsibilities that I had. The purpose is a little bit different. The CV should be tailored for each specific role that you apply to. So maybe on the CV, when you're applying for company X, there's specific project experience or specific product experience that you're highlighting in your CV that maybe you don't have on your LinkedIn because you've kind of tailored that CV specifically for that role. But knowing that at the moment, 72% of hiring managers will go to the CV first and then might go to LinkedIn, I would always say that have the majority of the detail in your CV.
Perfect. And obviously there is this function on LinkedIn where you can easy apply, right? LinkedIn has this recommended job specs. So what would you say, how many details shall people put on their LinkedIn in order like to be pulled for these jobs?
So I'm not sure I understand the question, Karen.
I think it's mainly about, you know, how many details, like should they put like their exact job title or what they do? Because obviously if they're like a regulatory manager and they just put like their job title, but they do quality as well, they might not be enabled for the algorithm for quality jobs, right? Even though they might be able to do them.
So they're kind of different things. So the way that LinkedIn will work in terms of like the roles that LinkedIn will show you will be based on the amount of detail that you put in your LinkedIn profile and the job titles that you put on your LinkedIn profile. You can also set up job alerts. So if anyone follows Elemed company page, you can set up alerts that will say, notify me via email whenever Elemed posts a new job. So you can do that kind of thing. And that doesn't really depend on how much detail you personally put into your LinkedIn profile. When you're actually doing easy apply, which is like to apply for the role, you can essentially just put like your name, your job title, and your phone number or whatever. But then I would really, I would question how many candidates that hiring manager may already have. So if you don't attach your CV when you do easy apply, there's a chance that maybe they just don't call you if they've already got a lot of candidates or other candidates that they're prioritizing. If there's not a CV attached when you do your easy apply and your LinkedIn profile is really kind of like quite basic in terms of the information that's on there, there's a chance that maybe you're not contacted about the role, or you're contacted as a lower priority about the role. So I would say always, you know, try to do a fuller application as possible when you can.
Perfect. Regarding clinical evaluations, Elena, do you think a mastery of biostatistics is necessary in order to do clinical evaluations?
Um, it I'm going to give you a regulatory answer, which is like, it depends. But generally, good understanding of being able to interpret data is important. It depends on the way that the company structure or how the role of writing clinical evaluation reports is done. So some companies will actually split the role and 2 or 3 people might write the CER, and then you kind of have a little bit more flexibility. But if you're writing the whole thing, you really need to be able to interpret the data if you don't have somebody already internally that's able to do that for you.
All right. We already spoke a little bit, about the candidate experience with these job portals. So if a candidate gets no response back after having an interview with a company, what would you say is the best strategy going forward? That person suggested, just picking up the phone, but in COVID times, that might not be as easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because some people are working remotely and then you can't always reach them when you call the general company number. So I would always say this is the benefit of being represented by a recruiter, by the way, and it could be Elemed, it should be Elemed, but if it's not, the benefit of that is that the recruiter does the chasing for you when chasing needs to be done. But if you obviously have done a direct application, it does become more difficult because you on the one hand, you don't want to be that kind of pushy candidate, but on the other hand, you don't want to be ghosted by the company. So what do you do in that situation? I always recommend to do 2 things. Number one, at every single point of the interview process, always ask the question, what are the next steps? And, when are you looking to make a decision? Or, when can I expect to hear back? Or when will you be giving feedback? Because if you ask that at every stage of your process, if the company doesn't commit to what they've just said that they're going to do, it gives you a reason to be able to send a follow-up and kind of say, hey, obviously on our last call 2 weeks ago, you told me that, we were going to have feedback. Unfortunately, I didn't hear from you yet. I just wanted to let you know I am still very interested in the opportunity. And I was just wondering if you've had a chance to make a decision with regards to my application. So I would send an email follow-up in that instance. If you're working with a recruiter, just push on your recruiter, give them a call, send them an email and just say, have you got any news on this? And if your recruiter is doing a good job, they should be asking these questions on your behalf anyway to the hiring manager. So they should be able to give you an update of the timelines, although things don't always go to plan. And sometimes recruiters get ghosted, but in most circumstances, I think by asking these questions, you should be able to have a good understanding of timescales.
Perfect. We had someone pre-register the question who is currently a biomedical engineering student and will be passing in 2021. So that person would like to explore the various different opportunities that he or she would get as a biomedical, obviously freshly graduated person.
Mm-hmm. So I think we addressed very similar questions to this, Karen, right at the beginning, where I would say, okay, look at the companies that, if you have a specific type of product experience, look at the companies where that experience would be interesting. Start with those companies and apply for a wide variety of positions that they have at the entry level.
Perfect. Someone is asking, they're having a break in their career and experience in regulatory publishing. Now they're unable to find a job due to the break in the career. Do you have any recommendations on how they can handle that?
Yep. So my question would really be to try to understand, is the fact that you're finding it difficult to find a job, is that because of COVID? Because obviously that has had an impact on what the job market looks like. Or is that because of the fact that you've had these career breaks? And really I would really ask of the companies that maybe are giving you negative responses, really ask the follow-up question to try to understand what is the reason behind that. If it's COVID, then unfortunately it's about kind of timing and about maybe increasing or broadening the kind of things that you're applying for. But if it's specifically about the fact that you've had this gap, it's really about trying to understand when you're applying for the role, making sure that you're really highlighting the experience that you have that's relevant. Another thing that you might want to consider is maybe a project. So maybe to jump in on a 6 weeks project, just to kind of get back in to working on something that's quite current for a company, and then using that 6-week experience on project X, even if it's temporary, to leverage it into a permanent role whilst you're continuing to make applications.
Perfect. Do you have any tips for negotiating? I think that might be salary negotiating that the person is asking for.
Mm-hmm. So I would say when it comes to salary negotiation, if you're applying for a position, you always need to, I think it's always a good point to start by understanding, where do you benchmark in the industry? So as opposed to just kind of like making up a number, have a look at our salary report. We did a really detailed report earlier this year, specifically on what the market rates look like. So start with that and use that as your data point. Because then if you're having a discussion around promotion or internally, you can truly use that. And we've had candidates that have taken that to their managers and have had positive outcomes. If you're talking about salary negotiation into a new position, I always stress, just be really clear up front. So when you're initially applying for the role, state clearly what your salary expectations are, and then just be quiet. So some people, they spend too much time talking when it comes to expectation, and then they kind of talk themselves out of their salary. So literally, you know, what you would say is something like, I'd be looking for the market rate based on a report that I recently read that was published by Elemed. You know, the market rate is X. And so, you know, based on my experience versus what I know you're looking for in this position, that's where, you know, that would be my expectation for this role. Be quiet and then see what they say. So don't go on to say, but I'd be willing to negotiate 20,000 here or there, because then you've automatically told them that you would accept 20K less than what you've just said. So you kind of undo what you've already said. So it's about kind of being upfront and honest, but equally don't get to the end of a process and dramatically increase your salary expectation, because also that kills trust. I did a piece on lowball offering for companies, why they shouldn't lowball offer candidates. In the same way, candidates at the end of the process shouldn't be hitching up their salary expectations. It's always about being clear from the beginning.
Perfect. We have another question. This one is on PhD. So what are your thoughts about a PhD? When and who would you recommend to do one? And what are your thoughts on overqualification with a PhD?
Right. Yes, I think it depends on the type of role that you're trying to apply for. If you're looking at something in medical writing, for example, highly recommended and you know, valued. In regulatory, it's a nice to have. In quality, it's a nice to have, but it's not a must. And so, you know, the first thing is really to understand, do you want to do it? Does it add value? Do you want to, you know, and if it's something personally that you want to do, go for it. When it comes to this concept of being overqualified, now, one thing that I want to stress is a lot of the time companies will say overqualified, and they don't mean overqualified. What they mean are salary expectations are too high. Because sometimes what we find is that people that maybe have just finished their PhD and don't have any experience, so are looking for their first role from academia into industry, might have higher salary expectations than people that already have 2 years of experience. And so companies might use the excuse or the reason this candidate is overqualified to mean they don't have enough experience for the salary that they're asking for. Because I don't see any company turning down somebody that has a high qualification and experience or salary expectations in line with what they're offering. I don't see companies turning down those candidates. So I think it's more about really making sure that you understand, even if you do have a PhD, it might mean that you earn more money later on in your career, but it doesn't necessarily mean that at the entry level, you're going to be earning, or you're going to be earning more money than anybody else that maybe doesn't have the PhD. And if you're okay with that and you're able to kind of pitch it at the right level, then I would say, you know, definitely go for it. And it's also good if you're able to try to build a little bit of experience whilst you're doing your PhD. I did a really nice Q&A on moving from academia to industry. So I would recommend you check that out if anyone wants more information on that.
Perfect.
Karen, have we got no live questions?
Well, the people are not really keen to ask their questions live. Most of them want to stay anonymous. So
Okay.
I've already asked some that came in via chat. I'm really sorry about that, Elena.
Okay, no worries, Karen. Let's go. Let's keep going. We've got a minute.
So how is the impact of COVID-19 on job opportunities? And I think we can also do the poll then.
Yeah, let's do a poll. We've actually got a question to ask you all about COVID. So Karen, maybe you can launch that poll while I talk
Yes.
on that. So
Um,
yeah, go for it.
no worries. I'm just doing it. Yeah, go for it.
So impact COVID-19. So companies that are in medical devices, specifically on kind of like elective surgeries, were impacted across the board, we saw from a hiring. But then on the other hand, obviously IVD companies, companies kind of in the ventilator or the PPE space or any of that, you know, were doing a lot of hiring. Not so much role growth in quality regulatory clinical, more on the kind of production side we saw. We did see kind of in Q1, Q2 of this year, a general, I wouldn't say roles were cut, because obviously we still have MDR coming, so companies are still cognizant of that. But what we did see is that companies took longer to make decisions. So hiring processes were a bit longer than normally what they had been in the past. Although last month was actually our busiest month for new jobs on, despite everything that's going on with COVID. And we put that down to the fact that obviously MDR and IVDR essentially is coming next year, so companies really need to. And also I think companies have kind of figured out how they're managing remote working and all that kind of stuff. So now that they've kind of already laid the groundwork, they're really just pushing forwards because, you know, the future is uncertain and they need to hire these roles. So we didn't see dramatic job losses like we have seen in other industries, which is really good to see.
Perfect, great. So I just launched obviously the poll about how satisfied people were with the way their employer handled employee relations with COVID. And most of the people who are on here are either very satisfied or at least satisfied. And there are just a couple that said they're unsatisfied. So that's quite interesting. So you all seem to have good managers there. Perfect. We only have 3 more minutes. So, Elena, I just think I popped the last question or maybe the last two. How helpful do you think are professional certifications, just like, for example, the regulatory affairs certificate that's issued by RAPS for a regulatory career progression?
How helpful are they?
Yeah.
So I definitely think the RAC, if you have the RAC supplemented to experience already in regulatory affairs, it does give you an edge. We do see that as well kind of at leadership level. So these type of things tend to make a difference at leadership level, I would say, more than at specialist level. You know, so some of the director roles, for example, they have kind of put as a preferred qualification, you know, RAC. And a lot of like the big multinational companies, especially American companies, really highly value that. When it comes to other qualifications, it really comes down to the hiring manager. I have to say, some hiring managers really will add a lot of value to it, whereas others might really just focus more on, you know, specifically the experience that the candidate brings. So it's always good to have both. But again, if you have a choice between, do I do this qualification or do I do this working experience, go for the working experience. That's always my recommendation.
Perfect. I think we have yeah, that's basically it. We only have one more minute. So thank you, Elena. I think we blasted through these questions. So it was great. Sorry for all the people that obviously we couldn't answer the questions. I think we still have like 50 more questions that we could ask. It seems that obviously, you know, this thing is high on demand, so maybe we can do something like this again. And we have one poll that I already started. If you got value from this session. And yeah, Elena, is there anything you want to add? I think it was great.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I didn't get a chance to already directly kind of address your question, and I'm conscious that the hour is already gone, but feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or just send me a direct message and I'll come back to you, you know, between now and the 4th of Jan, which is when we're officially back. I want to give myself a bit of time to reply to that. And you know, if you all see value in this, maybe we'll do another session starting in January to kickstart the year. Yeah, but thank you all for attending. I hope that you've got value, and I wish you all very happy holidays and a great start into 2021. And I'm great to see that 98% of people got value from this. So that's really, really pleasing to see. Take care, everybody.